Good morning to those present in the hearing room in Edinburgh and to those who are following proceedings on the YouTube feed. Today we begin a hearing which is planned to go over the next 4 weeks and has the purpose of concluding the oral hearing of evidence in the inquiry. Mr. McIntosh is leading our first witness, who I think is Mr. Michael Baxter.
Yes, Mr. Michael Baxter, who gave evidence previously in the Edinburgh hearings. He appears remotely, my lord.
Good morning, Mr. Baxter. Can you hear us clearly?
I can hear you clearly, Lord Brodie. Thank you.
Right. As Mr. McIntosh has just said, this is your second appearance before the inquiry. Thank you for your attendance. I understand you're prepared to take the oath.
I am indeed.
Sitting where you are, could I ask you to raise your right hand? And please repeat these words after me. I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by my Almighty God.
That I will tell the truth.
That I will tell the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Mr. Baxter. Now, as you will be familiar from your previous attendance, our plan is usually to take a break during the course of the morning. Your evidence is scheduled for the morning, but if you want to take a break at any time, just give an indication and we will have a break. Please feel that you're in control of the timetable in that sense. Now, Mr. McIntosh.
Thank you, my lord. Mr. Baxter, thank you again for returning to give evidence. Can I ask your full name?
It's Michael Allen Baxter.
And what I wanted to ask is that you provided a statement to the inquiry team. Are you willing to adopt that as part of your evidence?
Yes, I am.
I think it's probably worth acknowledging at this stage that the inquiry team and I are conscious that I'm asking you questions about events in 2009 and 2010, which is rather a long time ago. And if at any point you feel that affects your recollection, you should say so, and we might try and explore things in other ways. What I wanted to do first was, firstly, we'll do three things today. One is to look at the difference in timing of the two projects in Edinburgh and Glasgow, to the extent that's relevant to your work. Then discuss the work of the Capital Investment Group, as it was applied in broad terms at the time of the Glasgow outline business case and full business case, and then look at your work on a number of groups that were set up in the Health Board during 2009, 2010. I'm hoping we can do the first bit relatively quickly. To what extent were the outline business cases and full business case outline business cases, of the Glasgow and Edinburgh hospitals approved at approximately the same time?
So the original outline business case for the sick kids in Edinburgh was approved, I think, 2008, and 2000, roughly about the same time for the outline business case for Glasgow. The issue, I think, around the progression of the projects varied in the sense that the timing of progress, the implications of the financial crash in 2007, 2008, and the impact of the UK government spending review on availability of public capital then influenced the direction of travel on both projects.
Yes, and in simple terms, the Edinburgh project took longer to get the full business case. So we understand that the Glasgow Gateway Review 2 was January 2009, and the Gateway Review 2 for what became the Edinburgh project is September 2011, and that the full business case was for Edinburgh was in August 15, but full business case for Glasgow was in November 10. Is that broadly as you recollect it?
I can't comment on the Edinburgh one. I left the health service in at the end of 2014, but if that's what your records show, then I assume that to be correct.
Because what I wanted to sort of start off by is attempting to understand if there are any significant differences between the system that was being operated in for capital investment approval between when you left, obviously the latest time you can speak about, and the time that the full business case for Glasgow was approved. Now, I wonder if we can go to your statement and we go to paragraph 10 and 11, which is on page 6, we'll start, of the statement bundle.
Yeah.
Now, we obviously can read your statements, and you've set out in some considerable detail the structure of the capital investment group on this page and over the page. And it's 11 that we talk about the Scottish Capital Investment Manual. Now, if we look at bundle 48, document 3, page 136, which is the reference we've inserted, this is a draft. And I wonder if you can help us understand what was going on at the time, because we haven't been able to find the principal version of the 2009 Capital Investment Manual. And if we look at another document, the CEL 19 of 6th of May 2009, which is bundle 48, document 1, page 4, we see a letter, I think, from you. If we just check to the next page to see who wrote it. Do you recollect this letter?
I recollect the updated SCIM communications.
So if we go back to the previous page, we've not been able to recover from either Scottish Government, no, page 4, please, or from anywhere more esoteric like the National Library, a copy of the version of the manual you issued with this letter. And the document I showed you briefly before was the draft from 2005. And what I wanted to understand is, from your recollection, was there any substantive difference between the version of the SCIM that was in place in 2009 and the version in place when you left in 14?
I can't remember specific variation, but in essence, the Scottish Capital Investment Manual follows the sort of Treasury Green Book approach to business case development and a 5-case model with an initial agreement, an outline business case, and a full business case process, and that's supported by some technical guidance. From memory, I think the difference between 2005 and 2009, there was some further work done in England, following Treasury guidance on things like optimism bias, which was the tendency to overestimate benefits and underestimate costs, and how that was then factored into economic and financial analyses. But the overall process, I think that the format of the business cases would have been refined somewhat, but fundamentally the process would have remained the same.
We'll come back to the area of the design policy, the design quality for NHS Scotland, and the extent to which that's incorporated in a moment. But what I want to do is just ask you a question about that development. If you're a health board official who generates a outline business case in 2008, I'm sure they should all read the manual and keep it by their beds every night. But from their point of view, will it have evolved much between 8 and 10 when they put the full business case up?
What I would have expected to have seen, hopefully to answer your question, is that a business case would have been prepared on the basis of the extant guidance at that point.
Yes.
So if an outline business case was prepared on the basis of the 2005 and the full business case was then post 2009, then the full business case I would have expected to have followed the revised guidance, subject to the time, the proximity of timing to that being issued.
Yes, because there are rules in the manual about which version applies depending when the deadline is.
Yeah.
If we just look at the outline business case, which you've addressed in your statement on paragraph 16, which is on page 8. Now, this is why I need to check. Before preparing for this inquiry, when was the last time you would have read the outline business case for this hospital?
Probably around that time.
Yeah. And have you had an opportunity to look at parts of it for the purposes of answering our questionnaire?
I'd reviewed parts of it to answer the questionnaire, yes.
Right, but you've not reviewed the whole thing?
No.
No, I appreciate that. Now, we go to paragraph 16. You've set out in that paragraph, in the middle of it, the fourth line, as with the discussions around the acute services review, the outline business case did not go into extensive detail about the proposed design for the building or exact procurement model that would be used. Instead, it set out a short list of service options alongside the cost, risk, and benefit of each in order to assist the identification and validation of the preferred service option and how it would be delivered. Now, in this context, I'm not interested in the procurement method because I know that changes.
Yeah.
I'm not proposing to press you about that. But in terms of the outline business case not going into extensive detail about the proposed design of the building, is that what you would expect at the time?
At that stage, because effectively the outline business case would be prepared pre-procurement. So effectively the level of design would be adjacencies in terms of healthcare planning, in terms of the sizing of the building, based on number of beds and various specialisms, and the costings would be based on those estimates. Only when you're in procurement, where you then into the absolute detailed design process with the contractor.
Now, what I want to do is to go to an aspect of the response by NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde to our position paper on governance. And this is bundle 50, page 4, at page 2.4. And I'm not necessarily sure you've seen this, so we'll take it slowly.
Okay.
Page 24. Sorry, page 2, sorry. So it's on page 4, please. So do you see there's a section at Roman numeral 3, heading, subsection, we can zoom in if possible, please. Approval of the OBC, paragraph 138. NHS Greater Glasgow wishes to clarify that a draft version of the OBC was provided to Mike Baxter on the 11th of January 2008, and the government SIG issued a table of questions to NHS GGC on 28th February. These were responded to by NHS GGC on around March 2008. Now, they can't locate the correspondence, but they could find the table, which is then provided.
Okay.
I doubt you remember much of these events at this distance in time.
No, but what I would say is that what would, and not unique to the project in Glasgow or indeed Edinburgh, is that as business cases were being developed, there would be engagement between the health board concerned and the Scottish Government around any particular guidance or the development of the business case. I'm not specifically talking here about technical guidance, which is not the purview of my role or my expertise. But if there were questions around compliance with the scheme, then there would often be dialogue between the health board and me or my team around the development of the business case in order to provide guidance. What we tried to avoid was being presented with the final version of a business case coming forward that then there were issues with that then needed resolution. So it was really trying to work collaboratively with a health board, but it is the health board's business case.
I'm not going to take you through it, but if it's the case, there's two issues that I'm interested in. In fact, I should flag them now. So one is the question of compliance, if that's the right word, or concordance with Scottish government technical guidance, and we'll come back to that. And the other is the importance of having a technical advice team throughout the procurement of the project. Now, I mention those because they're things that interest the inquiry team. But if it was the case that neither of those things come up in your questions in the response document that GGC have found, why might that be the case? Why might you not have got into a discussion with them about those two issues in the outline business case?
So if I've picked you up correctly here, and please feel free to correct me, we reviewed what we were presented with, and if there was no disclosure of a particular issue, then we had no basis of questioning that issue. In terms of the kind of technical guidance, obviously the health board themselves had their own staff and their technical advisors that were there to provide them with evidence. If I'm straying off topic here, then please stop me. But if we had been presented with an issue in that list that represented a technical issue in terms of compliance, then neither I nor my team had the technical expertise to comment or address that. And what we would have done would have been to have sought advice through Health Facilities Scotland and, where appropriate, the Chief Medical Officer's office if an issue had been flagged.
No, I understand that, Mr. Baxter. I suppose it's more not so much what you would have done if an issue had been raised, or you could see obviously there was an issue there even from a non-expert point of view. It's more, would you expect a outline business case to discuss in any way compliance or concordance with technical guidance from the Scottish Government, or the fact they were or were not going to have a technical team through the procurement? Would you expect that to be in an outline business case?
I would expect the management case and an outline business case to detail the expertise that was being brought to bear in taking forward the project, whether that was internal or external. But in terms of disclosure, my assumption would be that if there was any deviation from standard, then there should have been a disclosure, and not necessarily in the business case itself or at the point that the business case was presented, but that would have been disclosed at an earlier stage in order to allow an analysis of that to have taken place. That wasn't the case in what we're discussing here.
Now, one of the things that you have drawn our attention to is the policy on design quality for NHS Scotland.
Yeah.
And it occurred to me that we should start by looking at the 2006 version, which was the version that was in post play at this point. But before I do that, we've noted that there's no reference in the outline business case or appendices to ventilation or SHTM or temperature. But it does say, if we go to bundle 17, in fact, I don't think we need to go to it, but that it will be built to the highest quality and safety standards and the best practice in terms of infection control principles. Is that in any way unusual? Not mentioning those details, but making statements of broad aspiration like that. Is that unusual for a business case?
I wouldn't say it's unusual at an outline business case stage, because that's about setting out as you've described, the aspiration for it before the detailed design has been undertaken.
Well, let's go to the design quality policy. So it's an Edinburgh bundle, which confuses us all in this inquiry because we have different numbering sequences for the two, which is probably a lesson for the future. But it's a bundle from the 9th of May 22 hearing, Bundle 3, Volume 1, Document 4, and the document itself starts on page 114. And this is 23rd of October 2006. And the signature of the letter is Mr. Smith, if you go 2 pages on to 116. To what extent is Mr. Smith a predecessor of yours?
No, Alex Smith was as it says on the document, was the interim director of finance. So he was, at the time of 2006, he would have been my boss's boss, if you like. So
that makes
at that point, I would have reported to David Hasty as the.
And David Hasty would have reported to Mr. Smith.
Correct.
Right. Now, what I wanted to do is go to the same place that you referred us to in a different version of the design quality, and that's on page 133 of this bundle. And if we actually go to 132, it makes more sense. So do you see at the bottom of the page, there's a heading called Activity Database, ADB?
Yep.
And we now know what an activity database is. We've had evidence about it. and we go over the
Yeah.
page, there's discussion on the second paragraph of how ADB is produced by the Department of Health, and the third paragraph from 2005, a Scottish Executive Health Department initiative. It's the last paragraph that you seem to think is important. Can you explain why?
Because what the policy set out in the 2006 and the subsequent version of it were a number of mandatory requirements. And from my statement and from memory, mandatory requirement 7 set out that the use of the activity database was a mandatory requirement. Now, the linkage to the discussion here is that because the activity database is predicated on English guidance and adaptable for Scottish technical guidance, then if the activity database is used in the speccing of facilities, then those facilities would be deemed to be compliant.
Well, we can go back to page 125 and we see the list of the mandatory requirements. And are you looking at mandatory requirement 5, that you must use the ADB process tool?
Sorry, it's mandatory 5, but apologies, that was my mistake.
No, I mean, it's a long time ago. So it says all NHS Scotland bodies engaged in the procurement of both new build and refurbishment of healthcare buildings must use and properly utilise English Department of Health's ADB as an appropriate tool for briefing, design and commissioning. If deemed inappropriate for a particular project, an alternative tool or approach is used, the responsibility is placed on NHS Scotland body to demonstrate to equal value and its application. If we go back to 133, this last paragraph seems to say something. What do you think it's telling the reader?
I'll need a minute to read it.
Of course.
If you don't mind.
We can zoom in, I think, and make it the last paragraph.
If you could,
great.
Yeah, making text a bit bigger on the screen would be extremely helpful. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Now,
So
carry on.
My interpretation of that is that where there is variation to the Scottish standards, then any adaptation of it should ensure compliance with the planning notes or technical memorandum.
What does that mean in practical terms for a health board? I mean, if we put ourselves in the health board's shoe for a moment, as opposed to your position. So you're planning on procuring a hospital. Your outline business case in 2008, What do you actually have to do? What do you actually have to do when faced with a Scottish Health Technical Memorandum that's been published at the time in terms of this paragraph? What's it making you do?
Well, in terms of this is in connection with the planning of new facilities. Clearly, it doesn't cover historic, but in the planning of any new facilities, my reading of that is that a relevant health board would have to ensure that the use of ADB data is amended to make sure it complies with the Scottish guidance.
How would you respond to the suggestion that this doesn't actually say you have to follow SHTMs? What it actually says is, when designing your hospital, use ADB as a system and check that its English design isn't inconsistent with various Scottish standards, one of which is SHTM. Would you accept that it's slightly at second order? It's not a direct instruction, is it?
I wouldn't necessarily agree with that statement, and the reason being, if looking at that paragraph that's been referenced, the specific reference to the adaptation of the English guidance or the data in the English guidance to reflect the Scottish technical guidance. Now, if the inference wasn't that the planning or the design should be compliant with our standards, why would that reference be in the guidance?
So you wouldn't accept that this is at the best an implication as opposed to an overt instruction?
I would have my own view, and I can only speak from my own view, is that guidance means, in my view, that the briefing should be compliant with the SHTMs.
The briefing of the design team, effectively.
Well, the the data effectively that's used to design the facility. Yes.
Right. And I mean, I appreciate this is not issue you were dealing with. We've had some evidence that when faced with the ADB code process for certain rooms, there were not codes in the English set for a particular sort of room that needed specialist ventilation in the eyes of some. Are you effectively saying that this process would have required the designer to check against the Scottish memoranda?
If there was an absence of data, then I would expect the data to be used to be compliant with the Scottish memoranda, yes.
Now,
and the source of expertise around that in the Scottish health system would have been Health Facilities Scotland. So if there was any dubiety, I would have expected a health board to engage with Health Facilities Scotland, who had technical experts available to provide advice to NHS Scotland at the time that this was being done.
Okay. Well, I want to think about the outline business case, and you may not be able to answer this question given the passage of time, so I'll put it and see how you... When you and your team reviewed the outline business case, would anyone in the SIG have been thinking about the issue of SHTM compliance, or would it have just been an assumption that it had been done, or was being done?
So if we're talking about the outline business case here, then I think the general position would be that the assumption would be that this would be taken into account in the development of the design going forward. As I've said previously, this morning, at the point at which the outline business case was developed, the detailed design of the facility hadn't been undertaken. So from that point of view, it wouldn't have been an overt position at the point of the outline business case.
So at this point, it's not at the top of the agenda because it's to come in the design process?
I would suggest, yes.
Right. Now, you provided us, to move on slightly, the briefing paper that was sent to Cabinet, and that's in bundle 48, document 7, page 308. And I just want to understand a little bit about what it's covering. Again, it's for an outline business case. So if we look at the cover paper, which is at page 309, would this have been written effectively by a civil service team?
Yes.
And then the actual paper, which is at page 313, again, this is a civil service document, albeit the minister has put his name to it.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, would it be fair to say that looking at this document as a whole, the principal topic in both the briefing paper and the actual Cabinet paper is value for money and affordability? There's very little else in here.
Yes, I would suggest that to be the case. And at the time, this was essentially the request to Cabinet to approve the funding for the project.
Because at this point in 2008, there's still an assumption that there is capital available. This is before the finances go a bit strange for the UK government.
Yeah. And early 2009, I think that the UK government budget, or in 2009, the UK budget, late 2009, I think the UK budget, there was a 30+% reduction in available capital funding.
So this is a pre-crash, as it were,
yes,
briefing document, and its primary focus is affordability and value for money.
Yes.
At this stage, to what extent would it have been in the contemplation of the civil servants writing these documents, including you, that GGC might eventually build a hospital that didn't comply with Scottish Government technical memorandum, or is that not even been in contemplation?
It wouldn't have been in contemplation, but what I can say is the expectation is that a project or any building that was being developed would have been compliant.
And that's going back to the design manual we just looked at.
Correct.
And just to be sure, there's no other, as far as you can see it, piece of written policy that is, in your eyes, requiring compliance with technical manuals other than their public design manual linked back to their CIM?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Thank you. What I want to take off screen, please, is the procurement model. When you deal with this in paragraph 27 of your statement, and you discuss the role of your colleague, Mr. Kinnear. Obviously, he's not an expert, a witness, but we're quite interested in the decision to go to an NEC3 contract model, which is in paragraph 27. If we zoom into the bottom half of the page, page 11. Now, you've explained at paragraph 28 your understanding.
Sorry, my fault. Ms. Mangor, can you give me the reference to the document?
So this is the statement by Mr. Baxter, page 11 of the statement bundle,
right.
page 20, paragraph 26, and we're on paragraph 28.
I have that.
So you discuss, Mr. Baxter, your understanding of the reason for choosing NEC3. And to be fair to you, you explained that Mr. Kinnear was the lead on the project. Now, Mr. Kinnear, he worked for you?
He did indeed, yes.
Yeah. So I think I can therefore probably ask you this question. Did you and your team, and therefore the Scottish Government, have any independent legal advice from construction law experts with experience of NEC3 at this stage when the choice is being made of what model to use?
Not specifically within government, but what I would say is that the NEC3 form of contract had been used in the development of a national construction framework for NHS Scotland called Framework Scotland, which had been developed through Health Facilities Scotland. That procurement model and the use of NEC3 was based on previous experience in England and a national procurement model used in the NHS in England called Procure 21. So there was empirical evidence available on the use of the NEC3 model in a healthcare setting. And from our engagement with both myself and with Health Facilities Scotland, engagement with NHS England or NHS estates in England, the experience of the use of NEC3, and really that was about trying to get to a position where there was more proactive engagement with contractors at an earlier stage, clarity around risk and risk share within a procurement model, and bringing in projects. The evidence had been that there was better delivery in terms of time and budget, and the use of that framework.
From your point of view, in the capital investment team, were you aware of any risks of moving to an NEC3 model that required to be mitigated in terms of the way project teams from within the health service would engage with these projects?
It was a different way of working, but there was a national team effectively set up through Health Facilities Scotland that was available to provide advice to NHS boards. So whilst this project sat outside the national construction framework, the fundamentals of the NEC3 form of contract, there was some external advice available to NHS boards in progressing such matters.
Because one of the features of the evidence we've heard from members of the project team and their consultants is, and I hope this isn't putting it too high, a certain lack of experience of NEC3 contracts from the people themselves. And we had evidence on that from Mr. Hall and Mr. Seaborn, amongst others. So is your position they could have got help from HFS?
There would have been help available from HFS because there was a national infrastructure put around the Framework Scotland position and the standard of contract or the standard form of contract that had been established.
I mean, I suppose by the time this is happening, how many years has PFI been going in its various flavours at this point?
By 2009, we're probably talking about 10 plus years, but in Scotland, I think 1998 was
Yes.
was, I think, around the first.
So it's 11 years. To what extent might there be an issue arising from a change of model in that people who've been used to, in recent years, procuring through PFI in a particular way you do things in that process, and now they're moving to a new model, and they would need to understand what's similar and what's different before they operate a new model?
So, in answer to your question, I would make a distinction between the use of PFI and the use of the form. I'm trying to remember the name of it, but I can't, unfortunately. The standard form of contract for public capital that was used in Scotland in the health service, and so NHS Greater Glasgow will have had use of both. Clearly, the project that preceded the Queen Elizabeth and the two ACADs, or ambulatory care services, that were done through PFI or private finance deal, but there'd also been other projects done through public capital. So there was a range of experience. I would accept that NEC was a new form of contract, but
because one of the impressions you might form from the evidence of people, including Mr. Seaborn, is that NEC3 was seen as going back to to some extent, to the old days. And therefore, you wouldn't have some of the features of PFI and PPP around the importance of knowing what you wanted early weren't perhaps seen to be as relevant in the new way of doing things in NEC3. And one wonders whether that's actually the right approach. Actually, NEC3 requires you to know what you want rather early. Have you thought about the idea that moving to NEC3 might put a burden on a procurement team that doesn't really understand this new way of working?
Not specifically, no. But what I would say is that, and Mr. Seaborn will have his views for his own reasons, and that's understandable. But the traditional form of contracting that was in use in the health service in Scotland, the experience of delivery of projects to time and budget had not been good. And with a project of this scale, an importance in the context of the Scottish Capital Programme, not just in health, but in terms of what was happening in Scotland at the time, that trying to get that certainty around cost. So I would suggest that actually the NEC3 doesn't preclude people knowing what they want and what they need out of a project at an earlier stage. It's the question of how early they're able to engage with a contractor. Because, for example, on a PFI scheme, in bidding, a contractor will put forward a design which actually won't be the design that ends up being built, because it's a comparator, it's an exemplar design that's put forward. So, in terms of trying to save cost and time, NEC3, given its general position, I think was seen as a positive and progressive move.
Is it if I'm understanding correctly, that your position is that NEC3 actually requires you to be more precise earlier than even a PFI in what you want?
I'm not saying it's more, but PFI was not an option in this case from an affordability.
But does NEC3 require the procurer to know clearly what they want early and to understand that and not change their mind later?
I don't think it's about not changing your mind. I think it's about having enough certainty that you can engage with the contractor in a meaningful dialogue rather than abortive work on designs that are then effectively ripped up,
right,
and not used.
Now, what I want to do now is to move to your involvement in various GGC groups and committees. And if we go to paragraph 30 in your statement, you explain on page 12, bottom half of the page, that you were part of the New South Glasgow Hospitals Laboratory Project Executive Board as in an observer capacity only. Now, what I want to do is, I've read your statement, and we can read your statement, is I want to effectively cover the same ground as you've covered here by reference to the documents in something like chronological order. just to check
Okay.
I've understood your position. And so what I wanted to do was start with what I think is the earliest record I can find of you being present at a meeting, which is Bundle 42, Volume 2, page 23, which is a project executive group meeting of the 24th of October 2007. And it has you in attendance, if we see at the third block of the sediment. If we could zoom into the middle. Now, from your recollection, do you think 2007 might have been the first times you were attending meetings in class?
In the third block, that's not me.
Oh, yes,
That's
of course.
Alan Baxter, Director of Planning.
Well, that makes it much easier, so we can move that away. Let's go to the next one. 2008, which is Bundle 42, Volume 2, page 30. This is 1st October 2008. And hopefully this is you.
Okay.
Now, the first,
No.
well, there's a reference to you.
Norman Kinnear attended in my place.
Exactly. So you're not there, but Mr. Kinnear is there in your place. And if we think about 2008 October, just in terms of the start of this story, is the autumn of 2008 roughly when you and Mr. Kinnear would start attending any of these groups, or would it have been earlier than that?
I can't say for certain if it would have been earlier than that. Looking at the proximity of the timing to the consideration of the outline business case, that would make sense that there was more involvement kicking in around that time. But I honestly can't be certain if there was anything earlier than that.
Since we're going to get into the question of what your status was in the executive board in a moment, it's probably a good idea to think at this stage, when Mr. Kinnear is going in October and the outline business case is happening now, would you have engaged in exchange of correspondence with Mr. Coulthard or anyone about what your role would be, or would that just be taken as your own observer?
Again, it's reflected in my statement. When I didn't attend the project review group. The terms of reference was tabled and agreed, but the first meeting that I did attend was the one in December, and at that point I had highlighted to...
No, I appreciate that, but if we just think back to, at some point, and I appreciate we don't really know when that is, but some point around about the run-up to the outline business case, it seems to be the case that you and Mr. Kinnear, alternatively perhaps, think it's a good idea to go to these meetings as an observer. And you'd agree that seems obvious from what we can see in documents.
Yeah. And that would be typical of any such project in terms of having a watching brief on it.
And so you go on a watching brief. Would you feel the need to formally set out your role and its limits in an email to somebody, or would it just be, this is a big project, we're going to spend hundreds of millions of pounds, we need Mr. Baxter there to keep us occasionally right? Is that effectively what it boils down to?
I would say from my recollection, and if I look at equivalent projects, whether that be Dumfries and Galloway Royal Infirmary, NHS Fife, there would have been a record of attending in an observer status. Bearing in mind that 2008, I was not the deputy director at that point. So I was reporting to David Hastie, so I wasn't the chair of CIG at that point. Certainly at the point at which I was the chair of CIG, then absolutely there would have been a requirement to attend in an observer role given my approvals role.
Now we then have your attendance at two joint meetings of the Procurement and Finance Group and the New South Glasgow Executive Board. One is on the 8th of April, which is Bundle 42, Volume 2, page 44. And this meeting, a rather large meeting.
Sorry, I lost your video and audio there.
All right. Well, so this is the 8th of April 2009. So this is the first meeting of the meeting, and you don't attend this meeting.
Yeah.
But Mr. Kinnear does, and at this point, are you now in post as the chair of the SIG? April 2009.
I'm actually trying to remember at what page. I know it's in the statement, but
I'll just double check for you while you look at the accelerant. February 2009, you say. So you're now in post.
Yeah.
And we have a large attendance. And whoever wrote the minutes, and I appreciate they're not you or Mr. Kinnear, has put Mr. Kinnear in present, and the only in attendance is Ms. Frew, who is taking the minutes. Now, this meeting considers the pre-qualification process and starts the approval of the employer's requirements, but you weren't present. The next meeting, on the 24th of April, so that's bundle 43, volume 7, document 6, page 15. So that's 43, 7, 6, page 15. So this is the same joint meeting. And again, you're not present, but Mr. Kinnear is.
Yeah.
Now, you then explain in your statement that there's a performance review group meeting at which you're not present, which approves the terms of reference. And that's bundle 34, page 133. And it's probably relevant to point out here that this is actually a meeting containing members of the board, which the previous ones weren't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you ever attend any performance review group meetings, actual board subcommittees?
Performance review group. I think there's a minute from December that I'm present.
Yes.
But just to go back to the previous 2 minutes that you've referred to, Norman Kinnear's role as major projects advisor and stroke PFI facilitator, Norman typically would have attended project boards for major projects that were going at that time. So that wouldn't have been abnormal.
No, and he would be there, as you would put it, in attendance as an observer.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, which I don't think we've managed to find out, the new remit, which we find at page 153, is approved. If we go back page 151, actually get the start of it. 152. So this is the terms of reference for the new combined group. Now, actually, although you have quite properly drawn attention to the fact that on the next page, 153, you are recorded as having a vote, along with Mr. Stewart from Partnerships UK. And you raise that later, and we'll come to that.
Yeah.
I'm actually quite interested in what the role of the group was, and I want to discuss that with you. But just whilst we're here on this page, do you have any recollection of what Mr. Stewart was doing at the in the executive board and the role of Partnerships UK?
So James Stewart was brought in as a sort of independent member. So Partnerships UK had a responsibility or a role from within the UK government, and did work with the Scottish government as well on infrastructure investment. And James was their chief executive at the time. So it was seen as important to have some independent membership on the board with a knowledge of construction industry and market, etc. as the project progressed.
I mean, one of the concepts that I've been learning about is assurance within a procurement project. What do you understand assurance in a procurement project to be in modern terms, or at least the terms you were familiar with when you left in 2014?
So I don't think the principles have changed in any way, in the sense that there's a model that's described as 3 lines of defense, which is your internal project arrangements and the degree of assurance that you get through that. So subgroups reporting up, escalation of issues, risk management. The second level is what I would describe as the program exec board and the role of the NHS Greater Glasgow board, which is effectively one step removed from the detailed delivery of it, where there are checks and balances in the delivery of the project. And the third level is really about independent assurance, which is sort of gateway review, internal or external audit review of things. So So that assurance framework, I think, is something that's quite standard.
So if you have an assurance structure of the project team, it being the first layer,
Yeah.
the executive board being the second layer, and things like
Yeah.
the gateway review being the third layer, how do you ensure that the information flows up that structure? In that, if you make a decision in the first layer to vary the project in some way, that the second layer and the third layer learn about it? What would be the process that a procurement project would have to ensure that the various layers of assurance actually find out about something happening?
Well, the two mechanisms that I'd be used to and expect to see one would be financial, and the second would be risk based. So, in terms of the level of delegation or escalation of issues, things around whether it was a variation around a financial matter, whether that was required to be escalated up because it was of a particular value, or if there was a risk issue that was of a particular score or was trending in a particular way that needed review or consideration at a higher level.
What about?
That's not.
Sorry, carry on, please. I interrupt you.
No, I'm saying that process is not atypical in any project that I've ever been involved in.
Given that this stage in 2009 is about the competitive dialogue stage, there's 3 tenderers in the middle of this year, it becomes one, and then there's a contract. How should this 3-layer of assurance deal with a proposal from somebody, either the tenderer or the project team, to vary an employer's requirement? How should that be reported within structure?
Well, again, I would suggest it would depend on the nature of it, and I think if we're coming back to if it's a digression from a technical standard, for example, I would expect that to have been escalated and reported either and through a risk register, because if there's non-compliance with any of the standards or the employer's requirement, then that is likely to generate a risk or an increased risk, and therefore that should be reported through. So I would expect anything like that to have been escalated. I can't remember the detail of the detailed governance within the project, but there were multiple groups that were reporting in at various levels, but anything of that nature.
If we go back to page 152 of the bundle we're looking at, which is the actual remit. So this is the only document we can find, and of course there may be others that we can't find, but this is the one we can find that sets out the term of reference of the executive board, that middle structure. And I'm assuming you read it when you realized you had a vote. So at some point you did read this. Does this provide an adequate level of detail about how the role of the middle layer, the second stage of the 3-layer assurance, is going to work in this project?
I would expect that this would be supported by the scheme of delegation. Any public body has a scheme of delegation in terms of financial authorization limits for various levels at board and executive level. So I would expect that arrangement, particularly the bit where it's talking about change control procedures, are authorized by the board before it can be implemented. I would expect that to be in line from a financial point of view with the scheme of delegation and whatever the risk arrangements were within the project, to reflect those risk management arrangements which were referred to at the bottom.
Because one of the problems that we have found is that third from the bottom, the reference to the executive board will oversee the management of change control procedures in that any change which impacts upon the project must be authorized this board before it can be implemented. Now, 2 issues arise that you need to know about. One is that Mr. Seaborn was quite clear in his mind, although I don't think he can point to anything written down, but he's very clear that this would be a change that affected scope, cost, or timing, if I remember correctly. But certainly he saw it as quite a high-level threshold, although it wasn't written down. And secondly, when we look at the minutes of the executive board from when it's set up till contract close, we see no mention of any references to there's been a change, would you like to approve it? So at the time,
Yeah.
were you aware of whether the executive board was approving changes?
Well, I would have seen that role in remit, and the fact that there was no changes coming through, or that certainly in my statement there are no changes that I can recall, specifically in relation to technical memoranda, but I can't recall any discussion around changes in budget. I do remember, however, in my role in government, that one of the things that happened during the procurement of the project was the development of the learning and teaching facility, where there was an additional building that was put on site, and it was a joint development with the University of Glasgow, and that required an amendment to the business case. So in terms of change and changing cost, there was a different mechanism for that, but I can't recall that being through the project executive.
Because one of the questions we asked you, and to be fair to you, you said you didn't know about this, was the removal of the maximum temperature variant.
No, I didn't.
And so what certainly troubles me to ask you about it is that if it's the case that the maximum temperature variant was removed during the competitive dialogue process, and the bidders were told, because they were, the document, and the effect is to reduce the maximum temperature that's allowed in the building from 28 to 26 degrees, which at least two of the bidders, possibly three, point out affects the ventilation solutions that can work. Should that be the sort of thing that would be approved by the executive board, from your point of view, as a independent observer?
Yes.
Why do you say that?
I think because that's material, absolutely material. And if I go back to my earlier testimony, what I would also suggest is if that was a proposal, then that would be a derogation from standard and should have been notified at the point at which that was being discussed, not in the full business case, which would then have allowed for an analysis of that proposal and the implications to have been undertaken and a view to be taken. So the fact that it wasn't raised either through the project executive board or directly with Scottish Government, there was no opportunity to challenge that.
Now, I appreciate that your answer to this question might be, I don't have the technical experience to look at something, but we've obviously got the bid documentation that was lodged by Brookfield Europe, which has in it a page in which they explain their response to the maximum temperature change and how that affects the ventilation. And it's a very long and beautifully colourful document produced by the design team and the procurement team in Brookfield Europe. Would you have seen those sort of big documents as part of this process, or would that be something you wouldn't have seen as part of the papers for this?
I wouldn't have seen the detail of that.
But they wouldn't be attached to papers at the executive board and delivered with a big sort of wodge of paper beforehand?
Not that I can recall.
I mean, it strikes me you probably would have recalled it because it's quite large and colourful. But you can't recall.
I don't recall saying. No, I don't recall saying.
So, how do you respond to the suggestion that, as the Scottish Government observer, as you put it, in the role, the fact that no one's reporting any changes should have made you alert to the fact they might not actually have a system to report changes, as opposed to there are no changes? Or is that being unnecessarily cruel to you on the level of rigour that's to be applied?
I wouldn't use the word cruel, but I think that the onus is on disclosure, and given the remit of the project executive board, then I would have expected any variations to be put through. Where there was a variation that required a change in budget, that's something that would have required a matter of discussion with myself and with Scottish Government colleagues anyway, because the envelope for the project was effectively fixed. So if there were any variations that impacted on the overall project envelope, or indeed the timing of the project, and I think there's some reference in, to engagement with Treasury around equipment, that's all about managing the cash flows around the project as it proceeded through. And the 43 million was a significant proportion of the Scottish Government's capital budget, which obviously it was drawing down from Westminster at the time. So, these were matters that were subject of ongoing discussion in respect of finance. but I can't comment in respect of the project governance and how these things were reported.
No, it's interesting that you point out that if the financial envelope was to be increased, then one would expect it to be on the agenda because they need to ask you for the money, effectively.
Yeah.
There is a view, which I think is only an inference one can draw from the evidence at the moment, that the ventilation, what we've called the ventilation derogation, the decision to go with 3 air changes or thereabouts, 40 litres a second, rather than 6 for most of the hospital, would have a financial implication, because if they'd gone for the full 6 air changes, it would have cost more and maybe would then have breached the financial targets.
Yeah.
Is there not a risk that, in a sense, having you there with your colleagues with a close focus on finance means that the project team will put finance over everything? They will aim, we have to build it on time and on budget. And if we have to cut some corners in terms of what we build, so be it. But we will build it on time and budget. Do you see there's a risk in that?
No, I would disagree with the premise of that. At the end of the day, the way I would view it, and the way I certainly would have advised ministers, if there was a cost implication from, the adherence to standard, if you like, and that became aware, and there was a variation required to the budget, then that's a discussion that would have need to have been had. There'd be absolutely no suggestion of simply to live within a budget envelope of cutting corners or derogation from standards simply to cut cost. Absolutely not. I would refute that. Absolutely.
And that view, which obviously you've expressed now, is that a view that you would have held at the time?
Absolutely, it would.
And how do you respond to the suggestion that that benefits from, in a sense, an element of hindsight, particularly in the fact that you now know what the then Minister, Miss Freeman, did in Edinburgh, in that she decided that the hospital in Edinburgh wouldn't open with non-concordant ventilation. And maybe it would have been different back in 2009-10. How do you respond to that?
To be honest, I don't think hindsight's got anything to do with it. I think this is about having a facility that is fit for purpose and compliant. And if the government are going to invest 842 million in a facility that essentially is not compliant, and the cost differential to make it compliant, that is a discussion that would have been had.
Well, what I want to do is keep going through the minutes just to sort of work through what happened. So if we look at the 1st of June meeting, which Mr. Kinnear's there but not you, that's Bundle 42, Volume 2, page 54. And that's the 1st of June meeting. We see Mr. Kinnear recorded as, I think, 9th person on the present list. You're not present.
No.
Then there's a meeting on the 3rd of August, which is Bundle 42, Volume 2, page 57. And you're present, 3rd from the bottom in the present list.
Yeah.
You would have been sent papers in advance for this?
Yes, I would expect so, yes.
Would you have had access to the previous minutes of all the earlier meetings?
Not of all of the previous minutes, I don't think, because from memory, Norman would have attended those meetings on not just on my behalf, but on behalf of the team. So the minutes would have been held somewhere, but I wouldn't have routinely reviewed those. If there was any feedback from Norman on any particular issues, then I'm sure he would have done that. But yeah.
I appreciate that Mr. Kinnear is not a witness, but should he have noticed the change of status that's being imposed on you by this remit?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Should Mr. Kinnear have noticed the change of status imposed on you by giving you the vote you didn't want that was in the remit? Should he have noticed that and reported it to you?
I can't recollect. I certainly don't remember it being discussed at that time.
But would it have helped if you'd known earlier this change of the remit of this group in finding out whether there was a change control process and providing an understanding of whether there were changes? Would it have helped to have the remit earlier than you eventually did?
Yes, I would expect it would, yes.
Because when did you first see the remit with your vote that you didn't feel you should have?
So it would have been, there was I think later that year, and it's recorded in my statement towards the end of the year, where I had attended and asked for the amendment to be made.
Right. So at this stage,
the terms of reference must have been recirculated. Yeah.
So in this sense, you hadn't, and I don't mean to put it loadedly, you hadn't noticed at this stage in August. No. Right. While we're just looking at this particular, well, I must just get it on my own screen because I don't want to jump around too much. And it's, so this is August, and if we go on to the next page, we see a project cost update paper, which provides the details of the cost as it then was. And on item 5, the evaluation structure is discussed and what the process would look like.
Okay.
And then that continues on the next page, on page 59. Now, if you go halfway down that page, there's a paragraph that begins, H. Byrne inquired if R. Calderwood would like to advise. There were presentations from the evaluation team, weren't there, to this executive board?
I can't recall the detail of it. If that's what the minutes suggest, then. And I'm just wondering detail of it.
Whether this is something you can help me with. Well, if let's look at your intervention on the next page first, that's at page 60. So on the evaluation structure continues, you're reported to have said, you advised you felt the program was very comprehensive, key issue of availability of resource to deliver the program, need to be preparation with respect to the outliers and all sensitivities around bidders are closed. And then someone informs everyone that the bidders are going to get the evaluation document.
Yeah.
Now, and then there's some suggestion for reporting about coding from Mr. Stewart. Now, one of the things that we've noticed in these minutes over the next few meetings is that there's a subsequent discussion about what to report to the board. And some of the people having that discussion have been involved in the evaluation process and some of them haven't. And I'm just wondering, given what you said about an insurance process, should there have been an overt report that this bid is compliant with all employers' requirements or is not to this board, to the project performance review group within GDC? Should that have actually been clearly stated somewhere, not in a presentation, but actually in a report?
In terms of the evaluation process, I would have expected that to have been the case, yeah. And if there were any non-compliant issues, then that would have to be taken into account. Because
if we go to the meeting that you attended, the one in, well, if you go to the one that you didn't attend the 26th of October, which is bundle 34, page 78. We'll just look at that on the way past, just to keep the chronological order going. Okay. 34, 78. Now that makes me worried that I've done something wrong. No, that's the wrong bundle. Sorry. What I'll do is I'll go back to your statement and yes, if we go to, sorry, bundle 42, volume 2, page 78. And so this is the meeting at which there is the discussion about what's to be reported to the board from the evaluation process, and you're not present. And the next meeting is at page 86. And you are present. And this is the meeting where, as you properly point out, you raise the issue about your voting rights. And we'll just go there first. So that's page 88, item 6. And you see the second paragraph there. MB noted that up now he represents Scottish Government as a voting member, but now requested that I realise you didn't write the minutes, but it does rather read as if you'd like the vote taken away, not that you should never have it. Do you appreciate why I might say that?
I think I can understand why you would say that. I think the wording would infer that, but I would typically expect that any attendance at a programme board would be there as an observer, not a voting member, and particularly when there was a business case that was in live development, given what I was now assumed as a role.
Yes, because if we go back to the previous page, item 5 at the bottom of the previous page, we'll take this slowly. So if you zoom into the bottom half of the page, the heading is Key Actions Underway to Conclude Contract with Brookfield. Now, in light of the remit that you know about, we read, AS, Mr. Seaborn, reported the project team were now in the process of carrying out due diligence with Brookfield, reviewing the board's employer's requirements against Brookfield tender offer to conclude the formal contract. Now, I think we're asking everybody who's at this meeting, who've got as a witness, which isn't everyone who attended, there's quite a few people. That tends to suggest that the actual people deciding whether to sign the contract are the project team, not this executive board. How would you respond to the suggestion that the executive board either delegated authority to the project team to resolve everything, or just let them get on with it without making a decision, looking at this minute?
Just give me a second to read.
Yeah, you might want to go over the page.
Well, I'll just read the bit at the bottom of this page first, please. Okay.
Because what there isn't in the rest of this document, if we just go on to the next page, there's a top page there's something about post-contract signing. There's a section of revision of government arrangements when you raise your issue. There's a communications update section. There's an update on laboratories planning. Various things about car parks coming in on page 89. But what there isn't, the next meeting is to be 16th of February 2010, and the contract we now know is being signed on the 18th of December. At no point in this minute is the executive board recorded as saying, we've been briefed on what's being offered. We are comfortable that it is compliant with employers' requirements.
Yeah.
We authorize the project team to tie up all the loose ends and Mr. Seaborn to go and sign it, Mr. Calder to go and sign it. There isn't an entry of that level in here. It's entirely silent.
Yeah.
The best you get is the paragraph I showed you on page 87, bottom of the page.
Yeah.
So I think I put this to Ms. Byrne. We put it to Mr. Seaborn. Surely one would expect the project board to make an overt statement of decision like that a week and a half before contract sign. Why isn't it there?
I can't answer that, but I would expect the same.
But you were there, I realise, as an observer, but you're an experienced, not quite procurer of capital projects. You're an experienced purchaser of capital projects, if I can put it that way. Shouldn't you have put your hand up and said, excuse me, when are we actually going to approve this contract? Because we haven't done it yet.
Whilst I've seen the minute, I can't recall the context of the discussion at the meeting and what was described in the meeting and how accurate the minute is.
I appreciate that, but I mean, looking back on it, do you think there's something missing, either because it's missing from the minute or missing because it wasn't discussed?
Well, there's no formal recommendation there.
No.
So there's key actions underway to conclude the contract. It's not a final conclusion.
Because the meeting there isn't a follow-up meeting before the 18th. I will ask Mr. Calderwood what he was told when he goes to the Health Board's lawyer's offices to sign the contract. Presumably someone has to tell him it's good to go sign.
Yeah.
And Ms. Burns made various observations about whether there should have been events here, but that's recently. But you don't have any recollection of the discussion beyond what's in the minutes?
No, I don't.
How do you respond to the suggestion, although principal responsibility must lie within the project team and the executive board and the health board's employees, that somehow you and Mr. Kinnear, as the Scottish Government's eyes and ears in these meetings, should have been alert to the absence of formal reporting on change and compliance with employers' requirements?
I can't speak for Norman. I think that the time that I was involved in this, I was reviewing the same information that was being presented to those that were engaged in the detail of the project. So I was privy to the same information. So I was basing a judgment on the same information that was being presented to others within the project. If there was other information that was presented in terms of non-compliance or non-compliance with the employer's requirements, then I wasn't party to that.
But how do you propose to suggestion that, although the fact there wasn't a process being reported in these minutes is not your responsibility, it's not a member of the project team, and not a member of the full member of the committee. Yeah. But how do you respond to the suggestion that having you there, you're part of a series of external eyes and ears in this process, as is Mr. Stewart as well, to be fair, and we'll talk to him on Thursday. And that therefore, this is something that you or your successors should be looking out for when they're in a executive board or something like that as an observer. If they don't see overt, clear approval of this is what we're buying, we're good to go, they should be saying so. How do you respond to that criticism?
Sorry, it's disappeared there. I think the assurance that I will have taken at the time will have been around the process that would have been followed by from the project board through the chief exec and the board of NHS Greater Glasgow before the contract was signed. And with hindsight, looking at the minute of the meeting, then clearly there should have been something more overt in the minute.
So you're assuming there would have been something else going on at the side?
Yes. Before the contract was signed, absolutely. Because what's described in the minute is not the basis of signing a contract.
What I want to do now is to move on to the full business case. But before I do that, I do wonder whether, my lord, although it's about 5 minutes early, this might be a good point to have our morning coffee break. I don't think I'll be more than about 40 minutes with Mr. Baxter.
Very well, Mr. McIntosh. We'll maybe take our coffee break now, and could I ask you to be back for 20 to 12, Mr. Baxter? Thank you.
Of course, Councillor Brody.
So Mr. McIntosh.
Thank you. Mr. Baxter's disappeared. Mr. Baxter, you still there? Mr. Baxter, can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
Thank you. I was just reflecting on the questions I was asking you about the November meeting, and it occurred to me I should double check what, in a sense, your interests at the meeting were. Because, and the reason I was sort of reflecting is that during the previous meeting in October, which you weren't at, the principal discussion had been which of the three bidders should be made the preferred bidder, and how that should be reported up to the performance review group who made that decision. To what extent do you have an interest as the SIG chair in which of the three bidders is picked?
I don't. The issue is whether the procurement process has been conducted in accordance with appropriate regulations, that the evaluation process that has been conducted has been done in accordance with the project documentation, and that is not open to challenge. That's essentially, I have no preference as to which bidder it is. It's based on the evaluation that's undertaken by the team, both in terms of the cost, quality, etc., criteria that are set out in the bid documentation.
So in fact, if you think about the presentations to the executive board about which bid is better, which meets which requirements, how many scores to give them, that's not quite none of your business, but it's literally not what you're interested in.
No, I'm not involved in that evaluation process, and again, that's part of the separation, if you like, between the role of CIG. We're not letting contracts directly, but equally we don't have an interest in particular bidders or in terms of the market. So that independence is quite important.
Because one of the things that I've noticed is that a presentation that you didn't see to the executive board and a subsequent presentation to the performance review group by Mr. Seaborn describe compliance or non-compliance with employers' requirements. You wouldn't see that because it's part of the choice process.
Correct.
And so, without returning to the topic of whether the minute of the 7th of November is accurate or whether enough was discussed, you wouldn't have seen, or if you had been given, wouldn't have taken an interest in the assessment of the three bidders, including the one that was received, chosen.
No, not at a kind of superficial level. I think obviously interested in the project, but in terms of the which bidder was preferred, no. The evaluation process was set out, and it's really the importance that that evaluation process was followed.
So, if the answer to the question, how did the board approve a bid that wasn't compliant, is that they did it by accepting that bid as part of the evaluation process, that's when they noticed, then you wouldn't be aware of that.
No, I wouldn't. Right. I think the other thing, if I could add, because I've equally had the opportunity to reflect over the break in terms of the questioning. So from that program executive meeting in December, what I'm not cited on is what the process was involving the board of NHS Greater Glasgow, if any, in the sign-off of that contract. So I'm not aware if there was a subsequent meeting and discussion with the either the full Greater Glasgow board or a subset of it that was considered,
yes, because you will know if there was a meeting of the executive board because you're a member, but you'll get minutes for it. But you won't know if there's a meeting of the performance review group, which sits above it. That's subcommittee of the board.
Correct, and that's what I reflected on in the break.
Yeah, and so although the remit that you saw delegated the authority to negotiate the contract in certain circumstances to the executive board, the performance review group might have just made the decision itself, and you wouldn't see that.
I wouldn't have seen it. What I would have been is notified by NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde that the contract had been signed.
Yes, and so I wonder if it can be summarised something like this: is you are, and I'm going to use some adjectives here, and feel free to replace them by better ones. You are alert to issues around exceedance of budgets, timetabling problems, delay, and non-compliance with process. Yeah. Those are what you're alert to.
Yes, that's essentially what my locus was.
And therefore, the consequence of that is that whilst you might notice other things to do with are they getting what they bought or which is the better bidder, those aren't your interests, and therefore any notice will be inadvertent, in a sense. If that's quite the right word, will be opportunistic.
I'm not sure if inadvertence is the right word, but
opportunistic,
the
perhaps, is the right word.
correct. Yes.
Would you accept that the idea that once we move away from cost, timetable, and process, it's now stepping away from your core interest?
I would suggest so. I think the process bit, I think, is twofold. I think the SCIM, the Scottish Capital Investment Manual, and compliance with that is the kind of prime consideration as far as process is concerned, but equally the CELs that we've discussed in the evidence sessions both today and when I gave evidence in 2022 around use of capital resource, design quality, etc. are equally part of that.
But I'm just going to try and remember to turn this computer back on, because I want to just check something, which is that during the process, at the point when the board chose its preferred bidder, were you involved in, as it were, sending a briefing message to the minister that had happened, even though you weren't involved in making the decision?
I can't remember. I will have been notified of the decision, and it would have been. I can't remember the specifics, but it would have been absolutely normal for any kind of notable event on the development of a project to send a briefing to Director General, my immediate boss, who was the Director of Finance and Information at the time, Director General, and ministers.
So if we have an email of you effectively receiving a message that we've chosen the preferred bidder and passing that up the stream, that would be perfectly normal. But that wouldn't mean you taking interest in what happened.
No, that would be normal.
Because you're the reporting mechanism.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move on to the full business case. Now, I think you're familiar with the primary concern that the full business case does not report either that the hospital wouldn't comply completely with ventilation standards at SHTM 0301 2009, and that the technical advisors supporting Curry and Brown were stood down in March 2010. Now, I'm not sure there's any value in going through the full business case in detail, but from your perspective, do you recollect whether either of those things were mentioned in the full business case?
I don't recall them being mentioned at all.
We can check.
Yeah.
Let's go to your statement and to paragraph 46. And you deal with design and compliance with SHTMs in the context of full business case.
Yeah.
Now you say in the second sentence there were no derogation standards referred to within outline or full business case.
Yeah.
And you don't recall any derogations being sought. Now, whilst we've discussed how, and if you mention it again at the bottom of this page, whilst we've discussed how the CEL 2010-19 and the design manual import a reference to SHTM 0301.
Yeah.
Is it fair to say that there is no document that explains how you do a derogation at this stage in the SIG, in the SCIM?
At the point, and again from memory, I don't think there would be something explicit, but that's not to say the process hadn't happened previously.
So you would know that as a member of the SIG?
Yeah.
I'm just concerned that the design manual reference, whilst you are clear in your own mind what it means, I suspect there are people out there who think it's not as clear as that. And I just worry that the absence of a policy on derogations written down is another reason why someone might think, I don't need to report this, it's just guidance. Do you appreciate why they might say that?
I do, and with the passage of time, and I don't know the exact detail of Assure and what's happened since with design assessment, etc. I think things have certainly been tightened. But what I do know is that as a community involved in capital investment within the government, we used to run a couple of workshops each year involving all of those involved in major capital projects. And there would be an opportunity to brief those participants on current issues, etc. And one of the things that was risen around the time of this was around the single rooms policy. And I refer to this in the evidence that I gave in respect to the sick kids in Edinburgh, in the sense of if there was a deviation from a standard that was set out in a CEL, and again, I would point back, the CEL does refer to mandatory, use of ADB, the activity database, then, there was knowledge that a derogation had to be sought, and not at the point that the full business case would have been provided, but at the point at which any kind of decision was needed to inform a design. So, for example, the single rooms issue at Sick Kids, there was a written request for a derogation that was considered by the Chief Medical Officer and agreed. And that happened before the provision of a full business case, but allowed the design to then continue in development in the knowledge that that derogation had been approved.
I think we have a similar document around critical care in the Queen Elizabeth around days.
Yeah.
So,
which I don't remember, but so apologies if that was a derogation, but I don't recall it.
So your position is that anyone who was attending your workshops in the community of procurers of health projects would have known or should have known that there was a derogation process out there to be used.
Yeah.
How do you respond to the position, I think expressly, simply put, that because it's guidance, Scottish Health Technical Memorandum, guidance is something you need to take account of, you don't have to follow it. And therefore, there is in fact little wrong in deciding to put guidance to one side and not turn anyone. How do you respond to that sort of line of approach?
I can understand the approach that's being described. But again, I would come back to the fact that whilst the SHTMs are guidance, the design quality policy refers to mandatory application of that in terms of the requirement in 5. So whilst it's guidance, the inference that I take from a design quality policy is that whilst it's guidance, it's expected it's applied.
Now, over the page on page 18, you explain 5 lines from the bottom of paragraph 47 that the Greater Glasgow and Clyde did not bring the derogation to the attention of the Scottish Government, either directly at the Executive Board or to the SIG, and the Scottish Government didn't have the opportunity to consider it. You then mentioned agreement from the Scottish Government to any derogation sought would be subject to taking and receiving appropriate technical advice. Who would that advice be from?
Typically on a technical matter like that would have been Health Facilities Scotland. Equally, there would have been engagement probably with the Chief Medical Officer, Chief Medical Officer's office, where there were issues associated with infection control.
If we go to the next paragraph, we asked you, it's 4th line, I'm asked what the consequences would be if an NHS board failed to comply with a CL, SHTM, or any other legislation, regulation, or guidance in a project that required approval from the SIG. Now, what's your answer to that?
Well, it wouldn't have been if it had been notified and not approved, then the business case couldn't have been approved. So
when you say not approved, the derogation not be approved?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. If the derogation wasn't approved, then the expectation would be that the derogation sought an alternative would have had to been taken forward.
And we've discussed whether there's any hindsight involved, so I won't return to that.
Okay.
The next paragraph deals with the 2000 6th edition of the Policy on Design Quality for NHS Scotland, which we've already looked at.
Yeah.
And the 2010 version, you say, applies the full business case. We should probably look at that. I mean, I think it's the same, but we should probably look at it just for clarity. So it's bundle 4 of the Edinburgh 9th of May 2022 bundles, document 9. And if we step on to the next page, this is signed by you, and
Yeah.
I've suddenly realized that I've failed to write down the page reference in here, so we're going to have to work it out from mathematically. So I think it would be on page 140, I hope. We go back 5 pages, please. Slow down. Go forward 1 page, please. Yes.
Ask for the text to be made bigger, please.
In the bottom half of the page, is there any material difference between the activity database section in the 2010 version and the 2006 version, as far as you're aware?
The only change, I think, is the reference at the bottom where it says that, there was a project that was being about Space for Health, which was about an online resource. But beyond that, I think the substance of it is the same. And the confusion that I had, I think, when I answered your earlier question, mandatory requirement is 7 in this. Yeah. So there were 2 additional mandatory requirements introduced in
so we go back 4 pages.
At the end of the,
one more, a bit further. Keep going. A bit further. Another one. 2 more. 1 more. Just keep stepping back, and we'll eventually find the mandatory requirements.
Page 113.
Yes, thank you, my lord. That was going to take you ages.
Yeah, that's 7.
Yeah, so it was 7. It was 5, and now it's 7.
No, it's 7, yeah.
Right, okay. Now, if we take that off the screen, I was thinking about how to deal with the full business case with you. And one option would be to laboriously go through it, but that would take an awful long time. And it did occur to me to look at the full business case and inquire whether you should have worked out from X, Y, or Z in the paper that they weren't following the guidance. But although they don't say they are following the guidance, they don't say they're not.
Correct.
Does this, when the SIG is reviewing a...
Well, might it even go a step beyond that? My recollection of the full business case includes, as a reason for the project being approved, I think, infection control benefits.
Yes. So there are lots of statements about quality, but what there aren't is an overt statement that we are not following the guidance. And I just wanted to think about the membership of the SIG and what experience and expertise they have. And to what extent was there anybody in the SIG who might be thought to have a knowledge of infection prevention control?
So we would have had representation from the Chief Medical Officer's office and Chief Nursing Officer's office.
Would you have anybody with experience in...
Sorry, I just missed representatives or representation. I just missed what you said.
So there'll be a representative from each of the offices.
Right. Thank you.
And that could vary depending on the nature of a project, if it was maternity or if it was acute services, but there would be a representative.
In fact, if we go to the section his lordship was referring to, so that's bundle 18, volume 1, document 10, page 665. We have at the top of a section, if we have jump back one page, we get the context. Not on a page. We have a section on maximizing resources, 2E 4.1.4, and then over the page, 2 pages, we have at C, the last sentence. In addition, the new hospital has been designed in accordance with the best practice for infection control to minimize hospital-acquired infections and associated risks. Now, at the time you would have read this, would you and your colleagues have picked up on that sentence as giving some form of assurance?
I would assess that be the case. So when with the membership of the CIG, the Capital Investment Group, colleagues will have reviewed in general terms the business case, but those with a specialist interest will have, focused on particular aspects of the full business case. So I would have expected that statement would have given a degree of assurance, yes.
If we go to page 685, we should have a reference about emergency care. And the last paragraph before 2F57, diagnostics, it says it's essential for patients with a high risk of being source of infection to others we manage separately to involve the risk of infecting other patients, and then it lists infections and isolation facilities. And then it says the infection control team have been fully involved with planning the hospital to address and reduce the risk of spread of infection through the design of the facilities. Now, I want to use this as an example because it occurs to me that there's a risk that we make assumptions. We know, as an inquiry, that the employer's requirements would appear to specify positive pressure ventilated lobby rooms. I'm not necessarily expecting you to know what they are, but they're one of 3 types of isolation rooms you can get. And according to the employer's requirements, all the rooms are to meet that standard. And there is some debate, I think it's more than debate, there is points made in the guidance that these rooms are not suitable for certain classes of patients, one of whom are infectious diseases patients. Infectious patients,
Okay.
well, sorry. Now, I suppose one possible way to look at this paragraph is it's a statement of assurance that the infection control team is fully involved in the decisions around isolation rooms, that your team in the SIG would have noticed that, would have taken assurance and relied upon it. That's one possibility. It occurs to me the other possibility is because there's no flag, we're not following guidance. The SIG's engagement with this sort of content is much more high level. That it's actually not looking out for these detailed problems and picking one sentence here, one sentence there is not something it's doing. It's just seeing there's no overt issues and moving on. Which of those 2 positions, or indeed something else, is what was actually happening?
I think that depending on the nature of the issue is somewhere probably in between. But the additional point that I would make is that the full business case doesn't simply come to the CIG first for approval. There are internal approval processes within any health board involving those that are involved with the delivery of care, planning of care, to provide that health board and the board of management for that health board with assurance around what the full business case is. So the assurance mechanism, as I described earlier, if you like, there is a degree of assurance taken from what has happened internally to approve a business case before it actually comes into Scottish Government.
I suppose one of those processes in this context would be the HAI scribe process. Have you heard of that?
I've heard of it. I can't explain the detail, but I'm aware it's to do with infection control.
So I use it as an example in order to set up a question. We're aware that there is a stage 2 HAI scribe, which is to be done before the design stage. Stage 3 is during the design stage, and stage 4 is at the end. We've seen a stage 2 HAI scribe, which I think has been subject to some criticism.
Right.
We have evidence from, in 2010, infection control, more senior infection control people other than the seconded nurse who maintain they have little or no involvement in the project at this point, including the lead infection control doctor and the lead infection control nurse. It's therefore possible that one inference is that whatever HI Scribe is supposed to do as a safeguard and a process didn't actually work in this scenario. And it therefore makes me think, to what extent are you, in a sense, relying as a SIG on the health board's processes all working and assuming an assumption of regularity in their processes when you review these documents?
I think there are two elements to it, if I may. One, yes, there is a reliance on internal processes, but I think the other bit is the reliance of the robustness of those internal processes, so that a health board, any health board, when they're signing off a business case, has it's had sufficient rigor internally from those that are directly involved, that assurance can then be provided to the health board, and effectively that assurance then can be provided into government. So if the process is right, that's one thing. If the degree of rigor around that process and challenge around that process is appropriate, then yes, there's solid assurance that can be taken from it.
But if it's the case, and of course it's too early to say at this stage whether that is the case, not least of which because we haven't heard from Mr. Calderwood, but if it's the case that the board's internal processes in 2009 and 2010 were not as robust as might have been hoped in terms of reporting derogations or telling people there was no longer a technical team, or indeed the HI Scribe process, would the SIG notice? Or would you just assume that it's all running fine?
Unless there was anything within the documentation that we were provided with to signal that there was a question to be asked, and there was challenge around aspects of the business case, but if there was nothing to signal that there was there is a problem, and again, some of the paragraphs that you've referred to would infer, compliance and high standards, if you like. So a board is signing that off before it comes anywhere near Scottish Government.
And also there's been a Gateway 2 review.
Correct. Well, to be fair, I think the Gateway review is more around the project and the project delivery than it is around necessarily the technical nature of a hospital. So it'll look at program and project management, if you like, rather than necessarily the detail of SHTMs, for example. That would be my experience of a Gateway review.
But if it's the case, or if it can be inferred that it's the case, that the board systems in 9 and 10, or multiple parts of them, were not considering issues around ventilation, technical team, we're not actually properly considering them, is the Scottish Capital Investment Manual / SIG process set up to spot that?
What the Capital Investment Manual sets out within the manuals for business cases, it sets out what the requirements are around demonstrating what the project is, how it's being delivered, the financials, all the rest of it. So it sets out the requirements of what is expected in terms of the delivery of a major capital project. And the assessment that the capital investment group would have done is whether the full business case demonstrates compliance with that as a process. To come back to your question, I think one of the things that a Gateway review as an independent process would do would be to look at the hierarchy within a project management structure in terms of reporting maybe some of the issues that we touched on earlier, in terms of escalation, in terms of risk management, for example, and how those are being dealt with. Those are factors that I would certainly expect a typical Gateway review on a project to test at various stages as the project goes through its life cycle.
Doesn't that rather rely on people being told about the ventilation derogation? If you don't tell the gateway review team, you don't tell the project board, the program board, you don't tell the board, how do you carry out all these checks?
Sorry, with respect, when I was referring to gateway review, I wasn't specifically talking about a derogation from ventilation standards. I was talking about the project management arrangements, the hierarchy of those arrangements, the management of risk, escalation of risk, delegated authority. Those are typically things that would be looked at in a gateway review. And the gateway reviews that were provided on the Queen Elizabeth project were extremely positive from memory.
Well, indeed, and that's one of the things that struck me as a little bit odd, is that we've discussed, and I appreciate you weren't involved at all the meetings, how a remit was produced for the executive board at which you attended, part of, and your colleague attended, which seems to have suggested there should have been a change control process, and it doesn't seem there was one. And so a gateway review might notice there was a remit, but isn't it reliant on project team members telling it, oh, by the way, there wasn't a change control process? Otherwise, they'll just sort of assume it's all working properly.
A gateway review is structured in such a way that there is generally a positive inquiry, if I can describe it like that,
right,
by gateway reviewers that will go in and ask a set series of questions around the project governance, etc. I've been subject to gateway review, and I've been a gateway reviewer myself and the different guys. So that would be typical, that you would go in with a set of questions to test what's going on, because you're coming into a project relatively cold initially, and there are certain factors that you would look to test, if you like, through that review over a 3 day period. And again, the gateway review reports are provided to the senior responsible officer, which in this case would have been the chief exec of NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde, but copied to the Director General in Health and Social Care and Government for information. So any of those issues, the interface between gateway review and the SIG process would be, if there were any recommendations that were made in the gateway review, there was a clear expectation that those recommendations would need to be followed up and addressed before the next stage of a business case came forward. So in between outline and full business case, if there were a number of recommendations, SIG would have looked for evidence within the full business case that those recommendations had been acted upon.
I suppose the final thing to say on this topic is that if this gateway review, the one that preceded the full business case, for one reason or the other, was unaware that it had been decided to procure the hospital not in compliance with parts of the ventilation guidance, that's another reason, in a sense, you wouldn't notice, because you would have had access, if not directly, the system would have had access to that gateway conclusion. So you're reliant on these other checks to work too.
That's correct.
Let's just look at the process, because I think it's probably important just to sort of check some dates. So if we go to Bundle 48, Document 9, at page 330, we have an email sending in the business case on the 22nd of October 2010.
Yeah.
And that is 18 days prior to the SIG meeting, which is the next item. We have a minute, which is on page 332. Now, was it in a bit late for that SIG meeting?
That's not untypical of business cases coming in, but I think, again, as I've indicated in my statement, the formal submission of a business case would typically happen after approval by the NHS board concerned. Okay, so a condition of approval effectively is that the board approves before it comes to SIG. What often happened and happened in this case is that we will have had sight of drafts in advance of the formal submission of the business case. So colleagues on CIG will have had the opportunity to review some material within the business case before it's formally submitted. And the purpose of that is really to identify and address any issues that are arising from the text that's provided, whether there are issues of policy or delivery from around the CIG sort of table, whether it's medical, whether it's financial, whether it's operational. So the timetable is not unusual, and I think again, as I've said in the statement, there were opportunities for presentations to be given by representatives of NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde to inform SIG of progress on the project and the development of the full business case.
And if we look at an email that we have, was it actually decided on the 9th of November, SIG?
No, because there were still outstanding issues on finance that had to be resolved. I think that's recorded in the minute.
And then, in fact, there's an email thread on page 337 where on the 15th of November, you're still waiting for comments. In fact, only one person had responded, Dr. Armstrong, who then was in Fife. No one else has responded at this point. Is this unusual to have a sort of an incomplete decision and a slight delay around responses?
It can, but equally, I can't remember the circumstances of SIG members' absence, or whether it was through illness or whatever. So, at the end of the day, the decision needed the consensus of CIG before a recommendation would be put forward on approval.
And this consensus didn't take place in the meeting. It was presumably done by email because there's not another meeting.
It would have been done, and I think in my statement there's reference to, and in the questioning there was reference to expedited procedures. So expedited procedures simply refer to a process whereby a business case is considered at the CIG. There are outstanding issues that are then dealt with in correspondence rather than waiting for the next formal CIG meeting, which I think at that time, I can't remember whether they were every 3 or 6 weeks.
Well, indeed, the December meeting was cancelled. The next thing is on page 341, which is 10th of December, which is a letter from Mr. Feely to Mr. Calderwood confirming approval.
So there would have been, those issues would have been resolved in advance of the Director General signing off, or the interim Director.
So just to recap, between the 22nd of October and the 10th of December, maybe a relatively short period, but before then you'd have seen drafts and reviewed those drafts and made comments. And you're assuming, well, you're not assuming, you know that the board has approved the full business case.
That will have been confirmed when the business case was submitted in to CIG. There's generally a covering letter that comes in with the full any business case that confirms it.
But then you are assuming, and you don't know, that the board has carried out proper board governance processes, HIS scribes and all these things before it approves it. But you're not actually looking at that level of detail.
No.
No. So in general terms, and I know you've addressed this in the Edinburgh scenario, it might be said, if we take this off the screen, that the scenario at Edinburgh involved some mistakes that weren't noticed. I mean, I realise that's a great shortening of a very complicated topic. And your position is that the SIG couldn't have spotted that in a shorthand.
Agreed.
But in this context, I don't think anyone's suggesting there are mistakes that weren't spotted. If there is anything going on, it's somewhat more significant that things aren't reported. Is the SIG capable of spotting, or was the SIG capable of spotting something like the decision not to follow all the ventilation guidance if it's not actually told that it's not being followed?
No, it's not.
This may be something you've left the civil service now. You now work for an independent agency. Yes. It occurs certainly to me that in a conventional private finance procurement, the funder would be heavily involved in any negotiations. Is that your experience?
Yes.
Yeah. And they might well as one of our witnesses has put it in a statement, have acres of lawyers all over the process from the funder? You're nodding. There's an unfortunate person reading a transcript. Please say yes if you want to say yes.
I recognize what you're describing.
Yeah. And so what I'm wondering here is that, is it a fair criticism that as it stood in 2009-10, the level of scrutiny being provided by the Scottish Capital Investment Manual and the SIG was, for reasons of custom and practice, it wasn't novel, materially less involved of the project than would have been what you would have observed in PFI projects from the point of view of the funder?
I would
It's a difficult question.
No, it's a different structure in terms of the funder's responsibilities on an ongoing basis within a PFI contract. I think that the point that I would make is that the due diligence, if you like, that's required in a PFI contract, I think is more overt from both the client and contractor side. At the same time, the size and nature of the contract that was being entered into here, and I don't say this from the point of abrogating any responsibility at all, but the contract is entered into by NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde. It's not Scottish Minister's contract. So the due diligence that's required, whether it be technical, financial, or compliance, the reliance that's placed by, or was placed then by Scottish Government on the processes within any health board, not just NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde, I think was much more dependent on scrutiny by the NHS board. I think that's fair to say.
How do you respond to the suggestion that, whilst that's all true, that hundreds of millions of pounds wasn't raised by Greater Glasgow and Clyde by some means? It was borrowed or received or raised by the Scottish Government or the UK Government, and it's public money. And it's public money that the Scottish Government chooses to spend, and therefore the system should provide a high level of scrutiny, a higher level of scrutiny than was perhaps provided.
I think clearly with hindsight, the fact that there was an issue that was known but not disclosed, then that raises that question. But the fact that it wasn't disclosed within the health board before it came to, or to at that level within the health board before it came into Scottish Government, I think is still a question in my mind.
And just to wrap up this section.
Sorry, could I just ask you to repeat that last sentence, Mr. Baxter?
Sorry, I'm actually struggling to recall exactly what I said.
Right. My note is that with hindsight, the issue not disclosed raises a question, and then something about disclosure within the health board.
So it's about it raised a question about the requirement for disclosure, positive disclosure within the health board.
Thank you.
But I suppose, does it also raise the question of to what extent should the central government rely on regularity and proper processes by the health board, or take an interest itself in making sure that the standards have been followed?
I think there's more that can be done in terms of prescription, and I think has been done since. Overt checklists, for example, are some things that can be done, which kind of reinforce what I think I've described. I don't think, from my perspective, there's a gap in terms of the policy and the process, but in terms of positive identification, then there are things that could be done to strengthen that, and I think have been in the intervening period.
Just to be clear, had you known in October, November 2010 that this hospital was not being built in accordance with guidance, what would have been your recommendation to ministers?
So I would have, the sort of process I would have followed would have been to understand what the non-compliance was, to have sought appropriate technical advice on that, and then provided advice to ministers on the implications of that. And clearly, if there was an issue with infection control, then I would have involved the Chief Medical Officer's office in providing and framing any advice to ministers on a recommendation.
And does this go back to the evidence you previously gave that you wouldn't accept derogations in order to meet the financial envelope?
Absolutely.
We've had some evidence from...
Sorry, could I just be clear?
Please.
If there was a derogation, and we're not talking about ventilation, but if there was a derogation from standard that didn't impact on, health and safety or infection control and technically was justifiable, then the answer to that might be different. But the one that we're describing here, I just want to make clear that situation, I think, is the basis of my answer.
We had some evidence from Mr. Hall of Curry and Brown that, if I recollect correctly, amounted to this: that whilst it was the case that it was decided to proceed to sign the contract with a ventilation system that only delivered 40 litres a second, 3 air changes rather than 6 to the general wards, that might be something that was open to later review or change, obviously with the possibility of a compensation event for the contractor. Thinking back to 2010, if during 2010 the Health Board had come back to you and the SIG and said, you know how we signed a contract which we thought was going to cost X, we've decided to improve the ventilation, we now want X plus Y. Given the situation you were dealing with at the time of finances, what sort of responses would that have involved from the Scottish Government? I mean, I appreciate you can't make a policy decision, but just knowing what constraints were at the time, how would that have been responded to?
I think, depending on the nature of the issue, and so I would say the nature of the issue followed by the scale of it, so we would have informed the approach to ministers, I think. I think fundamentally, though, the concerns over non-compliance would have overridden anything else, quite frankly. What would that have meant? So we were in a position at the point of 2010 where there'd been significant reductions in capital. A number of projects that had to be deferred. Obviously, there was a situation with sick kids in Edinburgh having to go, going down a private finance route. So either additional funding would have had to have been directed to health from elsewhere in the Scottish Government capital budget, or there would have had to been a reallocation of funding from within the health allocation in the capital budget. So that would have been the approach, really, is to look at the nature of the problem, the cost of it, the timing of it, and how that then fitted with the overall programme across Scotland and the implications of that.
Thank you, Mr. Baxter. Well, I think I've asked all the questions I need to ask. It might be an appropriate time to have a 10-minute break so I can check with people in the room and those watching remotely for the legal teams.
Again, Mr. Baxter, you'll recollect that our procedure allows for counsel to check if there's additional questions. We should be back with you in about 10 minutes or so.
Okay, I'll be ready. Thank you, Lord
Thank
Brody.
you. We stand. Mr. McIntosh?
My Lord, I have no Rule 9 questions or additional questions from my colleagues, and therefore nothing more but to thank Mr. Baxter for attending.
All right. And I have no questions. Mr. Baxter, that means that's the end of your evidence, and you're free to disconnect the online link. But before you do that, can I repeat the thanks that I expressed on the previous occasion that you gave evidence? Appreciate providing the evidence this morning, but I also very much appreciate, as does the inquiry team, the work that goes into that evidence. So many thanks, but you're now free to leave us.
Thanks, Clerk Brody. Can I also thank the inquiry for the ability to deal this remotely this morning, and now located up in Inverness. So that's been a big help. So thank you very much indeed. And
thank you.
Bye-bye.
We'll take our break now and reconvene at 2 o'clock with Mr. Connell leading the evidence of Mr. Winter.
Yes, my Lord, and Mr. Winter is remote as well.
Again, right. Well, we'll see each other again at 2 o'clock. We stand.